Welcome to Winescapes with my pomegranate juice, Winescapes with Artists. I'm Deborah Klochko, Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Museum of Photographic Arts, and I'm pleased to welcome our guest for today, John Turner. That is that colorful portrait that you see. John is going to be joining us via phone, and what I'd like to do is get the slides up so that I may introduce John to everyone. And while that's happening, there we go. John Turner is a extraordinary individual, and I've had the pleasure of knowing John for many, many years. He's everything. He is a collector, extraordinary collector. He's a writer, a curator, a filmmaker, a photographer, an artist in his own right. And I've had the pleasure of working on a big project with John. So I'm really pleased that John can join us for today's conversation. And John, with this fabulous glamour shot of you, in Hollywood style. Do you want to talk a little bit about the portrait of you that we're looking at?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the introduction, Deborah. I had written my first book on a self-taught visionary named Howard Finster, and the publisher asked me for a jacket photo, and I thought, wow, here's my opportunity to have a real snappy, serious-looking portrait taken of me. And at the time, I was working at KGO TV in San Francisco, and I was an arts and entertainment editor. And one of the pieces I did around that time was of a photographer named Mark Vieira, who lived, I think he lived south of San Francisco at the time, and he had a studio. And the thing that was interesting about Mark is that he had, at auction, I believe, bought one of George Hurrell's studio cameras, and he was a big fan of George Hurrell and glamour photography. He was a film buff, and anyway, so I did a piece on him in which, I saw, his George Hurrell's work. I saw what he was trying to do and his retouching. And anyway, I commissioned Mark to do a glamour photo of me for the book, and this is what it came out with me. I looked nothing like that at that time in '89, and I wouldn't be stopped. The police wouldn't recognize me in that photograph today.
That's great. And for the people listening in, George Hurrell, very famous Hollywood photographer. We have actually a number of his pieces in our collection, photographed in black and white Jean Harlow and other famous movie stars, and was known for this kind of lighting and large studio camera. So what a great way of picturing you for this. I wanted to talk,
Deborah, yeah. Before I forget, Mark has relocated to Los Angeles, and he has a website, and I believe he still does the glamour photography. So if anybody's interested, they could just look him up on the web and set up an appointment, and you too can look like a star from the 30s.
Very good, very good. So we're going to be talking about a project that you and I worked on together, and then about a collection that you acquired, which we'll talk in more detail. But I think it's important for our listeners to understand your background. You really did come from an extraordinary background. Growing up in Michigan, your family moved when you were very young to Vietnam. And so if you could share a little bit of your diverse background, that would be great.
Yes, my father was a pioneer in the field of forensic science. And in 1959, he was teaching at Michigan State University in the police administration department. And the president of South Vietnam, Ngo Dinh Diem, worked with one of the professors in the econ department at Michigan State and wanted to get some technical assistance for his developing democracy. And so one of the departments that collaborated in this project was the police ad department. And my father was, he and of course our family of 5 went there in 1959 through 1961. And at that time, my father helped the South Vietnamese police set up their forensic labs. So that's how initially we went to Vietnam. And in 1964, he had a scholarship to do similar work on the island of Taiwan. So we spent a year in Taipei. And that's kind of that's my overseas background, and those experiences certainly changed the direction of my life in terms of having a wider appreciation, certainly of art, but of people and cultures.
And it also formed you as really a traveler at heart. I mean, I'm sure that this year has been a challenge, but in general, you've traveled internationally every year, but not to the usual grand tour kind of places, but really interesting locations. And I know because you always send me a holiday card from the various places that you've been.
Yeah, like I said, I've been very fortunate to be able to travel. With time off from my when I worked at Channel 7, and these were places that intrigued me probably from my early interest in Robert Ripley's Believe It or Not, and also the movie, the Italian movie Mondo Cane, The Dog's Life, because that went to some really odd places that I hadn't seen about normal travel brochures or textbooks. So I never really created a bucket list or a wish list, but when I had time, I would just say, gee, I've always been wanting to see like people jump off those platforms in Vanuatu with their legs secured by vines. Yeah,
pre-bungee jumping.
Yes, exact pre-bungee, way pre-bungee jump. So anyway, that's how I continue to this day still having a bug for travel, because I'm a curious person and I really appreciate other cultures, and especially their art, tribal work, and actually. One of the things that I did, starting I think in the 90s, was I was a curator at the San Francisco Craft and Folk Art Museum. So there I had exposure to a lot of really wonderful shows put together by other curators on tribal artifacts and tribal weavings, pottery, things of this day, kind of very similar to what the main guy does in San Diego. So I supplemented that curatorial staff, which consists mostly of volunteers, with shows on 20th century American folk art.
That curiosity also lends itself to the variety of objects and items that you collect. I mean, it's everything from prison art to posters of safety from the 40s and 50s, blackjacks, thrift store paintings, folk art, and it's and outsider art, of course, but not just. Can you talk a little bit about your connection to outsider environments? Because those are a little hard to collect physically.
Yeah, no. However, though, they have been collected in parts by the Kohler Museum in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. That's now that's the only place actually in the United States which has segments of folk environments that were actually were and continue to be scattered throughout the United States. But in it would have been early to mid 70s, probably 72. I was working at a movie studio in Santa Barbara, which is actually located on the campus of Brooks Institute of Photography. And in Santa Barbara, on the wrong side of the tracks, was a wonderful environment created by a retired oil technician named Sam Darling. It was called the House of 1,000 Paintings. And what this fellow did was, he would mostly do memory paintings of the trips he took after retired from working on oil platforms, things of that nature, and in the fields as well. But he would paint scenes of when when he retired, he took a tramp steamer trip around the world, visited Asia and other places. And so when he came back, then he started drawing or painting these things on the back, on the masonite back of TV sets. And he would paint with crude brushes and things of that nature. But anyway, when he finished painting, he was so prolific, and they were very crude, he would just, he ran out of places to hang him in his house. So he'd nail him to the outside of his house until the outside of his house was completely covered by paintings. And then when he ran out of that space, then he painted all his wallpaper inside and painted his furniture. So I used to go over and visit Sam's place and got to know him. He's a real nice guy, and I got the feeling of what it was like to create an environment, and talking to Sam what it was like to live inside of an environment. But anyway, I started photographing Sam's place in the, probably the, 72. And from that, I became interested. I said, there must be other environments, not similar, but, that could be unusual home environments. And so I started writing people, and that led me to photographing these types of environments around the United States and later overseas. And that's how I initially got interested in work by self-taught artists.
So I'd like to go to the next slide. And before you talk about how you found this suitcase, I think it's a good point for us to talk about what outsider art is. We're using that term, and we're going to be talking about it over the next number of slides. So do you want to give your definition of outsider art?
Well, I think I can, I'll give you Roger Cardinal's definition. Art brut, actually, that was art brut is translates. It's a French term that translates as rough or raw art, and it was created by the French artist Jean Dubuffet in the 40s, and it has been appropriated in the United States and called outsider art. But as with this field, it has been almost impossible to define what it is. It's probably easier to say what isn't outsider art. And so I'll give you the definition for what outsider art is generally thought of. Well, I'm trying to see. I think.
Well, part of it is it's outside the normal channels. It's work that's created out of compulsion, out of obsession, and just a need to make art that doesn't necessarily follow any school.
Yes, that's correct. And this is art that was initially collected by Dubuffet through contacts he had at mental institutions in Europe. And the most famous of that was a fellow named Adolf Wuffli, who was institutionalized, as a young adult and spent the rest of his life. And this was in Austria. And he drew these fantasy representations of his own universe. And so, yeah, it's people who are marginalized by society, people who are visionaries, people who are who live in solitude, things of this nature. Is
Mm-hmm.
these are more the characteristics of the people who create the work.
They're
Outside
not
of
they're not making it for show or for sale. They're making it for themselves.
yes, they are not. Uh, they create it, you know, for themselves and not for the art circuit, and that's what, you know, differentiates between them and I guess regular artists or trained artists as well.
So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about outsider art so much is it's actually what brought us together for the first time. And so this suitcase has a fabulous story behind it. How did you come to acquire this and the work inside?
Well, as we've already established, I'm a collector, and when I was living in San Francisco in the later 70s, I would go to a swap meet in Alameda, California, which is just across the bridge. And I would go every Sunday to, it was called, I think, the Island Drive-In, or the Alameda Penny Mart. And it was there one Sunday in '75 that I was going down, you know, the aisles and seeing the dealers and this and that. And I came across this table that had this you know, this black suitcase. It was closed, but it had a banner on the outside that said circus, and it was you know, set on a table held up by sawhorses, and it was between like Mexican ceramics and boxes of old tools, things of that nature. And I opened it up, and lo and behold, it was filled with these collages, which really immediately caught my attention, because I thought, wow, these are really sensational collages, and I would certainly like to study them more. And so I asked the woman if she could tell me a little bit about the collector, or where she got them from. And she said that her mother ran a rooming house in Oakland for a number of years. As a matter of fact, she grew up in that, the woman grew up in that rooming house, and every off season, which would be the winter months, a circus clown would take a room and leave some of his possessions there, and he would come back every year. And she said he's a real nice guy. He had a stack of Life magazines that he kept under his bed, and he would pull them out, look through them, and cut out the pictures he liked, and he would make these collages about his life with the circus, and on shirtboard cardboard. And occasionally he would give one to this girl, this woman. And so that was about all the information I got, outside of the fact that he did pass away and left, you know, some of his possessions there, and the mother didn't know who to send them to, so they kept them. And then eventually she passed them on to the daughter, and the daughter was selling them at the swap meet. So that's how that box of imagery came to me.
And then, so fast forward, and I'm working at the Friends of Photography in San Francisco. We had you do a piece within one of the C.T. McClusky images for C Magazine, which we were producing at that time. And we got to talking about outsider photography. So if we could go to the next slide. And out of that conversation, you and I worked on a book and an exhibition called Create and Be Recognized, Photography on the Edge. And it was the first book and exhibition to look just at photography in relationship to outsider art. So can we go to the next slide? And as you were saying, that the definition of outsider is challenging. And it's
Let me interrupt for a second.
Sure.
I found this quote that I was stumbling for
okay.
2 minutes back, and this was by Roger Cardinal. But if somebody wants an academic definition of outsider art, this is what we can give you. And quoting Roger Cardinal, he says, outsider art is characterized by a combination of unswerving purposefulness and expressive density, extremism, a singular and often bewildering angle of vision, and forthright anti-realism. So if that makes what you are looking at feel that much better, you feel more confident in what you're looking at, there you go.
And we have the pleasure of having Roger Cardinal come out and work with us on this. He wrote an essay for the book, and it was a great pleasure. And unfortunately, he passed away in the last 2 years, or has it been longer?
Yeah, probably 2 years ago.
Yeah. And so, you know, the opportunity that we had in this project was, how do we categorize? How do we define certain areas? And we ended up creating three sections that we were focused on, including collage, photo montage, and manipulation tableau. And so, you know, and it included a number of well-known outsider artists, but who were not necessarily thought of as using photography in any real way. Charles August Albert Delschau created these, you know, he was born in Prussia, moved to Texas, and they, you know, just worked on these, what he called arrows, these imaginary flying machines. And do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, only that he was believed to have been a draftsman for a airplane inventors club, and within these compositions, these books, he used newspaper clippings dealing with aviation that were embellished with drawings of his imaginary aircraft. He started these in 1914 and completed 12 volumes, 12 scrapbooks, which I believe were thrown away. Then a picker found them in the trash, took them to swap meet, and there they were separated, but the bulk of them ended up with the Manel collection in Houston. So, and there's also a very extensive monograph done on these particular drawings that use a lot of newspaper clippings, a little bit of photography, you know, some photography, some illustration, but it's quite an extensive body of work.
Yeah, and what we found is that we were very willing to use photographic illustration from newspapers and magazines within the context of, you know, photography. And some of the artists did work directly with photographs, but this use, why don't we go to the next slide? Where this is just some overview of some of the artists. Again, William Lawrence Hawkins. This is one of his Last Supper series. And again, he is known for his paintings, and but he also was a photographer's assistant. Do you have more that you want to add, John?
He was also he worked primarily as a house painter and a truck driver, and he would also you know, he knew something about photography, and was he'd do pictures of people in the neighborhood, so he was known for that. But after he had been painting for a number of years, he started cutting out pictures from magazines and incorporating those into his painted works. And although it wasn't common, there still are, you know, a dozen or so more examples of this almost surrealist combination of photography and paint.
Next slide. Oh, the Steve Ashby's.
Next slide. I'm just kidding.
So these are sculptural pieces, and they are, I think, really quite wonderful. He would add, as you can see, a face, a photographic face to the cover, to the piece, and they were, they're articulated joints on this person. So he was completely untrained. He worked on a farm. And do you have more?
Well, he was the son of a slave, and he couldn't read or write. But after his wife died, he started, picking up branches in his yard and saying, "Gee, that looks like it's a human shape or this." So he'd whittle that down to what he thought was a person, and then he would embellish it with in a lot of cases, some of the clothes of his wife. He would cut out little swaths of clothing and decorate that. But he also his work is I find it extremely interesting, but it is thought of as erotic, bordering on the pornographic, and so he is not. There aren't as many collectors for Steve Ashby's work, but I think that his use of the photographic image gave a level of realism to the people that he was creating.
Next slide. One of my favorites, Alexander Lobinoff, was born in Russia, and he drew, he painted. He was definitely someone who was obsessed with guns, guns that didn't quite exist. He was institutionalized as a young man, and he really was creating these kind of icon-like images. And if you explore the border, there's all of these hand-drawn, hand-painted guns. And since he spent his life in an institution, they eventually let him ride into the village, and he would begin to set up at the photographer studio. And so he would paint this frame and pose himself behind the frame and create a series of photographic portraits. So sometimes they would have pictures of Stalin, and yeah, so he was someone who is doing something very interesting, and he's always in the same pose. He lost his hearing and his ability to speak, which is one of the reasons he became institutionalized.
And the only thing I could add to that is that the guns, which were the other focal point of the portraits besides Alexander himself, he created 38 different imaginary versions of weapons, and the way he was institutionalized, but I believe he was befriended by somebody who worked at the institution, and he would drive Alexander to the town's photographer, and Alexander would bring these his drawings and tableaus already assembled, and so then he would just pose it. You'd have he'd either hold them between his hands or have the photographer position him in such a way that he could get the desired effect. But he besides portraits, he also did some drawings. But these are the strongest works, and I concur with you. I really like these.
Okay, so can we go to the next slide?
We got a question from Marv that says, do you know what he's saying?
What do you mean?
Let me...
What the script is?
Marv, is that...
If it's what the script is, I don't know.
Okay.
because if it's not real Russian, if it's not a real language, it looks Russian. So Henry Darger is probably the best known American outsider artist. And he's actually someone that I was drawn to very early on. I lived in Chicago, worked as a janitor, and was obsessed with creating this fantasy world that was over 15,000 pages to this book that he was thinking about that was it in the realm of the unreal or unseen?
Correct, in the realm of the unreal.
Of the unreal. And so, and there's an interesting photography connection because he lived in a building owned by the photographer Nathan Lerner, who taught at the Art Institute when it was the School of Design. And when Henry passed away, they found these piles of this 15,000 plus page book. And, you know, there's other darker side to this, but John, do you want to add?
Well, only that he was placed in an orphanage at the age of 8, and that manuscript that you were referring to, the 15,000 page manuscript, is considered the longest book in the world, and it's basically about this fantasy world that he wrote about, in which these girls, young girls, the Vivian girls, are on another planet, and they're being chased by people who are ready to do military outfits that are willing to do horrible things to them to destroy them. So this is about the battle of their triumph over this military force on another planet. He took these photos mostly from storybooks and from cartoons and from pictures or illustrations from the newspaper. And what he would do, another element of photography is what he would do is he would take photos of these clippings, after he probably cut them out, and took the roll of film to the drugstore and had them developed, and then he would either he would then have them photographed again and either make these images larger or smaller, depending on how he wanted to place them on a page for his story. And then he would get a final print made. And from that, he would just basically trace that onto the paper and then do the finish work in watercolor. So he was using existing photographs, and then to supplement that, he would create other versions of photographs. And the thing, I guess, that was most interesting, or one of the more interesting things, is that this work was all done in secret. Nobody came into Henry's room, and it wasn't until he was in the hospital that Nathan went and visited him, and Henry said, I've got some stuff in my apartment, and if I pass away, you can have it. Mm-hmm. And so when he did die, Nathan, had the key, of course, to the apartment, and he found this trove of not just the book, but these illustrations, double-sided illustrations, which stretches as long as 8 feet, and those are considered. A lot of this work is considered, even though, like, the subject matter, as Deborah said, might be considered a little dark, and it's very gory and sexual as well. Mm-hmm. That these pieces, these drawings, are considered universally as masterworks in outsider art.
So let's go on to the next. Joe 40,000 Murphy, another Chicago-based artist. And John, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, you know, Joe Murphy was his work, I think, was it was known certainly before he died. But what his job was, he was an usher, and he worked as an usher at the Chicago baseball park, and also at a couple of Chicago entertainment venues. And what he would do in a lot of cases is that when, you know, stars were performing at these venues, he would, you know, there would be a PR person with him, and he'd ask them to see if they would take a picture of him with the stars. And the stars, and, you know, many occasions were accommodating. And the thing that was interesting, they usually got, you know, between, you know, like in this case, between Roy and Dale Rogers, and he became kind of the focal point of many of these pictures. It looked like, man, this Joe knows everybody. But he then, when he got the pictures, you know, back from the PR people, he would, you know, put them alongside of photographs of family members in a frame, and then he would hang it in his garage until his entire garage was filled of these PR photographs of Joe.
Next slide, and that'll show us one of the garage pieces.
Yeah, yeah. This is more of a, well, I don't think he saw all these women. So this is more of a photo montage.
And the shape of the triangle that's where the peak of the roof. Yeah. So he fit it right to the physical space of the house. So he created his own reality, and he was always the center of the reality. And there's Joe.
Yeah, and even though he was called 40,000, they thought, oh, you must have met 40,000 people. But in actuality, it was when he was a ballpark usher, people would just say, hey, Joe, what's the attendance today? And he said, around 40,000. So that was his nickname.
Next. So we're here for CT, and you've told us the story of how you found it. Can you talk about what's up at Rico Moresco Gallery in New York?
Yeah, Rico Moresco is put on an exhibition of I think about 25 of these, and it's the first time they've been offered. And these are some of the works of C.T. McClusky, and probably 3/4 of them have never been shown or exhibited before. And so that is what we'll be looking at, is what Rico Moresco has at his gallery in New York City. And the show is up through, I believe, October 24th of this month.
So, okay.
Well, anyway, so what I really like and love about these collages, and think they are important pieces of work, is that besides the fact that they've got this, this nostalgic attachment to, oh, it was done by a circus clown and what have you, and which I was unfortunately unable to really research. I mean, I went down dozens of rabbit holes and came up with nothing. But what I love about these collages is that I really get a sense of place, a sense of purpose, and a sense of a place, a romantic place, and a nostalgic place for somebody who loved being in the circus and enjoyed portraying it with the resources that he had, which came from, magazines and newspapers and things of that nature. But when you look at the whole body of the work, there were actually 53 that I found in that suitcase.
Let's go to the next while John's talking.
The ones that I like about what I like about them is that they if you look at the entire body of the work, they generally are kind of, you can divide them into three different subject matter, and that's, you know, the circus coming to town with the setup and preparation, the big tents, the animals working, and then you have the big top 3-ring circus performance, which this is one of those, and then the third part has a little bit to do with behind the scenes circus life, daily life within circus performers, and you also have the departure, which, you know, evokes a feeling of loneliness and always on the move and rootlessness. So these, I find these to be, you know, and these, Frank Marquesa, you know, looks at this as a surreal circus.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I like so much about them is there's a complete disregard for perspective, scale, excuse me, and there's an energy of the life of the circus that is conveyed throughout all of this. It's really magical in a lot of ways. Can we have the next?
Yeah, and as Deborah was talking about scale, you can see, you know, the largest figure in the composition is a bugler, I think probably from a fox hunt, which of course has nothing to do with this, but he's calling the people to the circus, or that the circus is coming. But as you can see, that's the largest figure in the composition, and it's put in the middle ground. And you look at the background, you can see, you know, he always has transportation. Well, he has it at the bottom. He has a train with these, you know, kind of foil tracks, and at the top, he has, you know, shots of, you know, houses in the suburb, which the circus folk can only drive by. You know, they don't have a wonderful house out in the suburbs. So it's, and you can see, like, you know, the families coming to enjoy this spectacle. You can see the animals working. You can see the work that the elephants are doing, pulling these other circus cages, which are done with candy foil wrappers. So he also used, in some cases, string and glitter on some of his other pieces, you know, including crayon.
Well, as you pointed out, in the background, the suburban houses, but at the same time in this picture, the tent is vibrant and colorful, and, you know, is more in the center of the composition. Not quite the center, but it's a strong counterpoint to the life that they can only drive by.
And the thing that's nice about most of his works is they're alive. You know, you don't have necessarily a central focal point. Your eyes can move all around the composition, and it keeps the eye moving, keeps the eye dancing, and when you look at the animals and the motion, you can almost hear the noise, you know, created by the traffic and the elephants and the bugle. And he also reinforces that, where he has pictures of crowds, and you can see a circus band, and you can almost hear it performing, at least your imagination. So that's what
Next slide.
Like about.
And this is the one you talked about packing up.
Yeah, there it looks like they're taking it down. You can only see the skeletal remains of the big top, and as you can see, the train that'll be pulling the circus cars to the next town are already on board, and you know, the elephants are working at the bottom, except I think those are elephants from probably Asian elephants doing logging work, you know, that. And then on the other side, you have, you know, like a chef creating meals for a kid, which also, that doesn't look like the circus food that I was familiar with.
Next slide. So elephants are definitely an important part of the circus and an important part of his life at this time.
Yeah, and you know, you find him in most of his collages, and here, all he did is you know, he took a photograph. I mean, he cut this out of a magazine, and then just added some embellishment at the top, which is something that he probably did himself, or he cut it out of another magazine or a poster, because he did have, you know, in the suitcase that I bought, there was you know, some scraps of other magazines and things of that nature, and that he had, you know, like animal cracker boxes that he would cut some of the animals out of, and then he would paste those into some of the collages.
Next slide.
What's unusual about this one is it was the only one in the group that had an actual photograph taken at the circus, and I assume it was by McClusky, and it looks like it was you know, some circus workers by the circus cars, either unloading or packing. But there you have all these you know, the circus tigers and lions in their cages. You see the camel, but also there is the band, you know, playing the music on for, you know, here we are at the circus and see these wonderful animals. And then, of course, in the upper left-hand corner is you know, a town that they could have pulled into a bigger city. And the thing that you see also in some of these collages is that, you know, the only, you know, back in those days, which I'm thinking are the 40s and 50s, that the circus, when it came to town, the only available space at that time was acreage outside the city or on the city limits, open fields. And so it was always, you know, in the collages, you can see they were always separate from the, you know, the real urban environment, and the people who were coming to the circus were always, you know, nicely dressed, and they were urban and suburban and what have you. And you can see this sense of being an outsider in these collages in terms of circus folk.
Next slide. And again, traveling on the road.
Yep. And there you can see the different, you know, the different kinds of, you know, trains and even in the upper top, you see like trolleys, things of this nature, but they're all bringing people to, you know, the central drawing of a circus tent, the big top.
Next. Oh, something completely different. Did you have anything more to say about CT before we move on?
No, the only thing I can add to that is that the only way I was able to like kind of get a sense of when these were made is by looking at the, you know, the photographs from Life magazine and looking at the, you know, the cars and the clothes that people were wearing as to, you know, when these were made. Because the woman I purchased them from, she really didn't, you know, she couldn't give me any real dates. And unfortunately, I was unable to locate her. I wanted to, you know, to find her again at the swap meet and talk to her more about CT and find out if there, you know, other things that he may have had. And I never saw her again, and was never able to track her down.
Okay. So thank you for that. Next slide. So we talked about you being a photographer and photographing outsider environments, but that you say that this is one of your best known photos, and it was a performance piece.
Yeah, that was a piece that, you know, some people may be, or that photograph, some people may be familiar with. It was, as it says there, it was taken in '75, and it was a performance piece that was constructed as a statement about the manipulation and capture of imagery by corporate broadcasting, corporate television, and how that is almost a dishonest disenfranchisement of franchise of those images. So what they did is they took two strong images this is the collective, the Ant Farm, which is 4 people who actually had backgrounds in architecture, and took a, you know, they were fans of the consumer culture of Detroit in the automobile culture, in bigger is better, and Cadillac seemed to be was the most opulent car around, and so they decided to use a, you know, they bought a Cadillac that was, you know, that was running, and then they customized it to make it look like a car of the future or something that an astronaut would drive, and fitted it. You see that fit on the top. In there, they have a television camera, and they also built those bubbles, those tinted bubbles, so they really couldn't see out of those windows. And they had a monitor of what was a TV monitor, so they could see what the camera saw that was mounted on top of the car. And so they got into this car. They had this wall of TV sets, this imagery that they wanted to destroy, that they wanted to you know, show the impact of this technology and the media coming together, in which they would destroy it, and it'd be a chance for you to reconsider what you were looking at and what media was doing to you. And so they invited, I think, about 300 people, including all the local television stations, for this performance. And you know, the friends, we knew something about, you know, I had met these people maybe 6 months before, so I you know, knew a few of them. And so I had a general idea as to what they're going to be doing, but the people in the media, the local TV broadcasters, this was on a weekend, they had no idea what this was and what prank was going to be. You know, actually, it's a very smart prank that was going to be played on them. And anyway, so they, you know, so they invited around 300 people, and everyone was told to bring their cameras, you know, to add to the documentation. And this was a photograph that I decided, you know, where I wanted to be for when that happened, because the car, you know, the Cadillac was probably maybe 75 yards away. And then just before they started, they poured gasoline over the sets of TVs and lit it on fire. And so then the car started, and I thought, wow, this is going to be a really difficult thing to shoot, because, well, I'm going to be either looking the wrong way at the wrong time and miss it. So I just did it. Basically, I took this photograph by kind of like an audio stimulus. Is that when the car started, I looked, and then I kind of said, well, the closer it sounds, the louder it sounds. That's what I've really got to be attuned to. And then I preset the camera to one of the faster shutter speeds, and then I said, whenever I see anything enter that frame, I'm snapping the picture, and that's what I got. And when I had it developed the next week, I thought, wow, this came out quite nicely, and I sent it to Chip Lord, and Chip liked it and said, do you mind if if I make a postcard of it? And I said, sure, go ahead. And it became the next year it became the most popular art card or art postcard in the U.S. and has been used for countless articles on the farm, and for collectors and for MTV
and if we go to the next slide for a new book that's coming out, right?
Yeah, this is a book done by the recently retired director of Pacific Film Archives in Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and he has been interested in the ant farm and that performance piece. He did a show at the Berkeley Art Museum on the ant farm, and this was a retirement project that he's looking at, just the imagery that came out of that particular performance, and it'll be out, I believe, in the middle of November.
So if we continue on, so the last images, the last two images we'll talk about are something that you're working on now. And these are, you've gone back to being an artist. And these are I have to say it's a little bit about obsession, John, but you've been photographing and painting on photographs for a while now.
Yeah, yeah, well, probably about 2.5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had this surplus of photographs, and a lot of them were in print, in a print format that I had taken all over the world, and I put them into photo scrapbooks and things of this nature. And I remember that the first time I saw a painting on a photograph was in Mexico, like 40, 50 years ago, and those were those photographs that had the hand tinting on them, the light coloring with watercolor. Mm-hmm. And I thought, gee, maybe I could try some of this on my own photography. But and I started out using just acrylic paints, and then I went to acrylic markers, and yeah, I just really enjoy it because it gives me a sense to actually repurpose and give a second life to mm-hmm. any of the photographs, and also give another emotional tone to the work I was doing. And that's what excites me, to the fact that, yeah, I've probably done over, somewhere between 800 and 1,000 of these.
Next slide.
A lot of them, well, a bunch of them I was interested in the disruption of pixels in television production, because that's the field I came from, is that if you had a broken image, people in the suits in the office would, get all excited about what's wrong with the transmission. We can't put out a product like that. Whereas I always thought it was kind of interesting. And with the advent of Zoom and these other, FaceTime, things of this nature, is we seem to get a lot, well, we did for like 6 months, into 2020, where we had a lot of this disruption with the pixels, with the Zooms and the TV interviews, which were done on, laptops. Mm-hmm. And so I would take pictures, off the TV screen, and develop those, and I'd paint on those, because they had kind of this sci-fi type of look to them, and it was like automatic surrealism. And then I would take the ones that I painted on and then photograph those again, and then paint something else around them. So some of those actually I do 3 or 4 layers to an image. But it's something that, I really enjoy it. It's fun to experiment with photography on that level.
So I just want to say thank you. And for those that are interested in seeing more of C.T. McClusky's work, go to the Rico Moresco website. There's also an essay that's been written about the work, and with a strong emphasis on circus. And I have to ask, John, the portrait that we're seeing of you, is that a Howard Finster?
Yes, it was. That was a portrait that he did of me in probably 1978. And you talk about obsession. That was a fellow who, in a 20-year period, did 46,000 works of art, and he signed, dated, and sold each one before he died in 2001.
Okay, with that, do we have any questions or comments? We're open. Or you're all just in shock. If you have a question, please take your microphone off. Okay.
Well, I think we were able to silence the whole group.
I guess they're still trying to process what we see in all of that.
Wait a minute. Wait just a minute.
Okay, Marv.
John, is there a group of collectors for this outside art?
Yes, it's a very, when I started looking at this art in the, early 70s, there were probably, maybe 150 to 250 people who were aware of that type of art. That was contemporary folk art as opposed to the traditional folk art painted at the turn of the century and in colonial times, which was favored by collectors at that time. Like I said, there were very few people interested in contemporary folk art, but then they had a show called Black Folk Art at the Corcoran in DC, which presented some just exceptional work by African-American artists, self-taught African-American artists. And so the field pretty much took off from there. And today they are, I couldn't tell you how many thousands of people have an interest in this field. And it's also being taught in a lot of different colleges, and a lot of different art classes now include folk and outsider art. The galleries have taken, they started working with that material maybe 25 years ago, and that work has got the attention of that community and the museum community, in that a lot of this work now is like in major museums in New York City and Los Angeles, and in terms of gallery sales, some of this stuff is certainly way beyond my means to purchase, and it's even being auctioned at Christie's. So I hope that gives you kind of an idea of what that field is now.
Yes, thank you. I have one follow-up, and that is, my mind went blank.
I'll let you think for a minute. There is a big outsider art show and sale that's in New York every year that seems to get bigger and bigger.
Yep.
They also in Chicago at Intuit Gallery, you can see Henry Darger's room recreated. So
the American Folk Art Museum in New York, of course, shows of this type of material, of the contemporary self-taught work from Europe and from the States. And before I forget, there will be a show in January called Photo Brut, and it's an amazing collection of outsider photography. This is the second book that is now being done on that field by a French filmmaker who has, outside of these photographs, he has an exceptional collection. It's called ABCD collection, and that show will have some of the work that we've shown, plus dozens of other photographers that he discovered that are just amazing. And that show will be at the American Folk Art Museum. I believe it opens January 6th of 21. But if you're in the area or know people in New York who live there, tell them to go see that show. It's amazing. And right now, I mean, if you don't think you can get there, you can go on Amazon and get Bruno Deschamps' book called just The Brut Photography, a Brut Photo.
Marv, did that question pop into your head yet?
Yes.
Okay.
It is the philosophy of outsider art in comparison to the academic world, where I think most artists come from. So my question is the difference between the academic world and the outsider world.
Well, before I'll hand this off to Deb, I'll just state that the concept of art brut, as crafted by Jean Dubuffet, was invented to challenge the very definition of art, and it's like I said, it kind of throws itself at you. And these are people who created this who don't have an art background, don't reference art. Very seldom will they reference other people's art, and it's a very personal expression. It's a kind of a gateway to their vision of the world that they see. So when you're looking at the general the general field of art, be it contemporary or further back, those are based on traditions and technique and scholarship, so that the history that preceded you, and you can either build on that or reject it or create your own. But it's usually it's funneled through the academic world.
And I want to add to that, because working on that book and that exhibition changed me forever in a good way, because it, in dealing with photography and contemporary art, I realized after spending so much time with these outsider artists that what I was seeing coming out of the more academic, more traditional means was not nearly as fresh, as passionate, and as original. And so what it's done is it's changed the base of how I experience and evaluate current contemporary art. And if something is really fresh and exciting in the contemporary art world, I have the comparison of what comes out of outsider art to help balance that. And it's, I really appreciate that change. And so it's, there's something that's very exciting. I think for some people, it's harder to look at the outsider work and really understand what's going on, because you don't have the same roadmap to understanding. You don't have the same guidelines to understanding. But just looking at the range of C.T. McClusky's work that we looked at, his use of space and his mixing of scale and all of that just created a vibrancy that you don't feel in a lot of other work. So I don't know if that really answers it, Marv, but
Deborah, the light went off in my head.
Well, Marv,
off or on, Marv? I hope it went on.
On. One other thing I'll add to Deb's last statement is that the contemporary art world is now, or has been actually, looking to the world of outsiders for a while. And I would say a good reference point is that Cindy Sherman, who has been involved with photography for a number of years, she collects the work of a woman named Lee Godey, who did portraiture of herself at a Trailways bus station photo booth, in which she created she was a homeless woman, and she would she get the clothes that she got from the thrift stores, like furs and things of this nature. Well, she would go to she would create another persona, and put makeup, and she would to give an indication that she had a tan, she would take tea bags and keep them in a glass of water for a day. Then she would put that composition on her face so it looked like she had a suntan, and she would go and have her pictures, her portraits taken in the photo booth. And these would, a lot of times she would staple these to her paintings. She was an artist, and she would sell her paintings on the steps of the Art Institute in Chicago. And some of the students, became aware of what she was doing, and now her photographs are more important than her drawings in what she was the world that she was able to create inside of the Trailway photo booth.
Yes, I highly recommend getting our book, Create and Be Recognized, because there's a lot more artists in there. And I don't know if it should still be available, but
It'll be,
you know,
it'll be available, I think, you know, on Amazon as a used book.
Yeah. But anyway, so thank you all for being a part of this. And I thank John for sharing his passion with us. So thank you all, and look forward to next time. And unless you have any more questions, we're going to sign off. Thank you, Claudia.